Salvador this night. I'm so excited about our show, so excited about what we are going to bring to you. And we're going to just jump right in. Mexican witchcraft and sorcery or brujeria has long been an integral part of traditional Mexican culture that permeates all strata of social hierarchy, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and education. And brujeria de rancho refers to brujeria as it's practiced in rural areas of Mexico. There are brujos and brujas de rancho throughout that region who offer their healing, their divination services, acting as advisors, spiritual coaches, even meting out justice for those who don't have the resources to be able to tap into the legal system. And tonight's guest, who I am just psyched and fanboying all about, is best-selling author Laura Davila. And I want to just say right off the name, right off the bat, um, her name I misspelled on three-quarters of our promotional materials. So I apologize to her and to all of you who might have seen that. But her best-selling book is going to be the topic of tonight's conversation. We're going to talk about a tradition that includes components of folk Catholicism that will be accessible to pagans, neo-pagans, non-Catholics, practitioners of hoodoo and conjure alike. And so I just want to remind you before we go live and introduce you to Laura that this is a live and interactive broadcast. This is your chance to be part of the conversation. So feel free to comment, to ask questions, and say hello. And we'll be back with Laura and my amazing co-host Michael Perez McQueen right after this. And while the intro's playing, go ahead and drop us a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And we are back. And Michael, welcome. It's good to have you back. And of course, our special guest tonight, Laura. And I'm gonna go ahead and let Michael give you a little bit of an introduction, since he is. I'm so grateful that he's the one that introduced me to your work. Like I said before we started, I just finished the book, and it's riveting. And I'm people who know me know that that's not an easy comment, or that's not a common comment for me to make. If I love something that much, it's a great book. So I think folks are going to find out tonight why. But Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history together and allow Laura to tell her story.
So Laura and I have known each other for over like the past 2 years now through three. It's been two. It's been a minute. And so Laura is absolutely amazing. We met through kind of the Catholic folk magic Instagram community, and we connected on our work with the saints and our magical work with the Catholic intersection between magic and working with the saints. So I'm going to hand it over to Laura. And Laura, just give us a little bit about your background and tell us everything. Tell us everything. It's great.
My name is Laura Davila. I'm a practicing bruja hechicera en Salmera and a bruja de rancho. I'm a magic believer since the day when I was born. My grandmothers were the ones who introduced me to the practice. One of them, just like Jan Michael said, like she didn't call herself a bruja. She was more like in the mystic side of the craft, doing magic, but without acknowledging or admitting it. And the other one used to make a living of her magic. My grandfather, he was a tarot reader. He was a Rosicrucian, and he was very into ceremonial magic. And my other grandmas were like into folk Catholicism and mysticism and, magic, brujeria, and salvación. Um, that's how I started practicing. And I started practicing really young. And I got married very young too, and I got married into a super conservative family, so I had to like stop. But when I immigrated to the United States 13 years ago, I didn't have a way to make a living either. So pretty much I left my hometown to not be like doing that, but here I didn't have another option. So that's how I restart with my practice, and here I am. I just wrote a book of Mexican sorcery. It went out on February 1st. You can get it in pretty much every place where you can get books, and I'm so happy to be able to share all that with you guys.
Well, we're so glad to have you here for so many reasons that I'm for probably one of the first times doing the show in 5 years. I don't know where to start. The book is incredible. I'm gonna while I'm talking because nobody needs to see me. I'm gonna put the graphic back on the screen. There's a QR code so you can go right to Amazon and order it, or go to your favorite bookstore and order it. But I've just got to tell you that a couple things struck me, and I guess will could be our jumping off point. Um, One is that we live in a society and culture that as the healing process goes, we have to first become aware of problems that existed, like colonialization. And so for the last maybe 5 or 10 years, there's been a lot of focus on colonialization, but it's been a focus that has a tendency to drive a wedge, and your book was refreshingly a healing approach, because the problem that I think exists is that so many people think, well, the colonialists were them and I'm me, and I'm Afro-Sicilian and Romani, but in my bloodline there were colonialists as well, and
Mhm.
there's very few countries, if at all, where our cultures weren't colonialized at some point. And rather than saying, oh, this is horrible, this is how we ended up with this is how we ended up with that, you embrace it, and by embracing it you become whole, you get that piece of your soul back, like we talk about in our traditions. So I wonder if you could start off by talking a little bit about that, so that people understand why I don't think your book is just for Mexican practitioners. I don't think it's just for Latinx practitioners. I think it's for
For
all of
everybody. Well, first of all, you have to understand Mexicans as a culture. And I
Mhm.
think not only Mexicans, I think Latin Americans and Italians. You know how it is where mi casa es su casa, my house is your house. Hey, I will fix you a plate. How our moms are very sharing, welcoming, like arrima tu amigo, like make some space for your friend at our table. So I don't know where that started to, like, where it stopped, because it's not how we were raised, it's not what we were taught. So for me was to bring back like what our ancestors in general were, you know. Um, the second thing, as Mexicans, we have a lot of like mixture of different heritages. Not
Mhm.
only the indigenous one, we have the Spanish one, the Arabic one, the Jewish one. So I try to honor every single root of the tree, because yeah, the tree may be one, but it has so many roots, and when you cut one, you're taking away strength in the tree. You know what I'm saying? Because every part is essential. And I put this example with a lot of people who don't understand in these words. I'm like, okay, a lot of us come from divorced parents, right?
Mhm.
I know sometimes, dad or mom was the one who was more like the victim, and the other one is the perpetrator. But you're both,
Right.
whether you like it or not. And let's say, like, thanks to your dad, you inherited a really nice voice, and you have like a tenor voice, a opera voice, but you're like, no, I don't want anything that comes from my dad, not even his gifts. But his gifts are a given because you're the daughter or the son of that. What you do with those gifts is up to you, but they're already yours. So it was a way to say, you know what? Yes, we need to scream for reparations. We need to, people who have some kind of privilege, to make sure we're using that privilege right. But we cannot chop a hand or take an eye because, part of our ancestry was chiri. And when I say chiri, I say these people were doing the best that we could with the resources and the level of conscience that they have, you know just like we're going to be judged at some point in 100 years probably, or descendants are going to be saying like, but these pendejos were only in the computer, like talk,
Right.
screaming for reparations and making social justice, but they were not planting trees. They were
Right.
so mean, they were so stupid, you know what I'm saying? So I try to have the same, I don't know what word I will use, but the same mercy probably that I would like my descendants or descendants to have of us, because we're trying to do the best thing, as a community, calling out things that not right, but we're we're doing it in ways that we don't know in 100 years how they're going to harm future generations.
Mhm.
But we're doing it from love, we're doing it because we think like that's right. So I acknowledge a lot of things in the book, but it is written from a place of compassion, from love, and the goal of uniting not only Mexicans, Latin Americans, people who were struggling, because our ancestral trauma doesn't come only from indigenous colonization, it comes back from the Romans.
Mhm.
So is we share a lot of these wounds, you know so that for me was a way to bring some healing. Yes, the book has itself a lot of chaos, but you cannot bring only chaos to the world. You have to bring something that is equivalent, and I think I the thing that I was trying to do, people is receiving it very well because it was done from a place of love.
I think that that's very profound, and I think, like, somewhere in the book, you talk about, kind of that collective place of our magic, and I think even, because I think people mean very well, in their practice and reclaiming their practices, that they're like, "Well, we don't want anything to do with the colonizing aspects. We don't wanna deal with anything of the Catholic aspects. We just want the indigenous or the pure practices," and we see this across the board. We see it in hoodoo, we see it in African diasporic practice. We see it in Italian folk magic of people trying to kind of um, purify the practice from the colonialized roots. But at the end of the day, when you take away those elements, we kind of negate our own power. We're kind of negating our own power because this is what makes the magic. And I always tell people, especially in kind of African cultures, like, who are we to take away these elements when these are what our ancestors gave us? Like, we're not honoring our ancestors if we're just saying, well, that's stupid, or that's dishonoring in some way. So I think that that's the tree metaphor is such a powerful metaphor.
Yeah. Well, that's another example that I put too. Like, your ancestors already paid the price.
Mhm.
It's just like, like I came here illegally. I suffer 7 years without legal documents, without being able to see my some of my grandparents dying.
Mhm.
For maybe like my grandsons, like, oh my god, but this is so wrong. I don't want this American passport. But why not? I already
Right.
paid that price for you, you know? So use it right, you know, acknowledge that it was a price that somebody in your family, somebody in your bloodline, somebody in your ancestry had to pay for you to have these, but take it. It's yours, you know?
You know, I have a question that you talk about in the book that I think is that some people may have glossed over or they may have scratched their head, and that is we talked a little bit before the show, and you talk about it in the book. You know, the Iberian connection and how when we were talking about before the show about New Year's Eve. Why don't would
Yeah.
you mind sharing that story? Because I think that's a powerful observation to share in a world where so many people are saying, "Well, this is my tradition. You can't do it. This is a closed tradition." I've heard people try and say the Italian tradition is a closed tradition. It's not. The magic that we practice, that I practice in the United States, as much as it comes from first generation practitioners from Italy, even them, even my aunts and my uncles and my grandparents, when they came to this country, it changes because our tradition comes from our suffering. It comes from there were new
The
obstacles,
lack,
new suffering,
exactly.
and it's easy to get kind of caught up and down in just focusing on the suffering. But I want to talk about that in a little bit. Tell that story about New Year's Eve because I think
Yeah.
people can relate.
No, I love, I love New Year's Eve. Like that's one of my favorite dates. Not only to party, not only to drink, just it's a new start, and it's the perfect time to do like magic, and So the first year into my second marriage, my husband, he has German heritage, right? And I remember like he went, at 12, after the grapes, he grabbed a pan and like a spoon, and he started making a lot of noise, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, this is good luck, because in that way you're like kicking out, like espantando, like scaring like bad spirits. And I'm like, with because of the noise. And I'm like, oh my god, we do the same in the rancho, but people in the rancho make it with guns to the air, boom boom,
Mhm.
so we make the same noise. And he's like, silly, this is not German, this is not Mexican, this is Roman.
Right.
So we share a lot of these traditions and how we do it, and nobody's copying anybody. It's just, we the root was the same. They make noise to kick, out the bad spirits, the bad luck, and receive the new year. But we were doing the same, but in a different way. But the root was exactly the same. So I put this example, like even like in the what we use, like roux. Everybody in Mexico, Michael, how like la ruda. Everybody's
Yeah.
like, well, but this is Mexican, and nobody can, like, this is a closet practice. And I'm like, do you know who took the roux to Mexico? The Sephardic Jewish.
Right.
Roux, the one that we use, yes, is one that is native to Mexico, but the one that we use for limpias and for ramos, it was brought from the Jewish, just like garlic, you know.
Right.
Yeah, the massive production ay, of garlic may be Asian,
Mhm.
but that was brought to America. It wasn't something that it was native even there. So I try to explain that, because I think a lot of books just make it up like, oh, this is indigenous, and they don't even explain why there is not like reference on the back, or quotation, citation, and it was something that I tried to be like really, really, like precise, because just like I was telling John Michael, I have had like I was very lucky on how people is receiving these. And it sometimes it's overwhelming because I don't know how to take the price, because it's not something that I invented or created myself. These are not Daphne Hechicera spells.
Right.
This not even belongs to my grandmothers. It's great grandmothers. You can like trace these, like the San Anthony spell.
Mm-hmm.
I could trace it 300 years back.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And some of these prayers are even in these ensalmos are in the Inquisition of Malaga,
Right.
Spain. And it's said too that some of these ensalmos too were used in like in Italy, in Iberia,
Mm-hmm.
just like the court magic. Yeah, we have the Micante Putli, the ones that they use court magic in indigenous side, but we had this because of the Iberians. That's why
Right.
this practice became so strong, because it was, or like, just like imagine your two abuelas from the two sides do the same thing. You're going to end up like adapting it really strongly, because you see that in the
Right.
two places. So it's something like, yes, uh folk Catholicism, folk magic, especially folk Mexican magic, Mexican sorcery, is not a close practice, because is is a lot of like practices that they were not close in the first place. Just Catholicism is not a close practice.
Right.
Even the beliefs of our ancestors mexicas or the chichimecas, or a lot of like tribes in the Mexican territory, they were conquering each other, and they were making and adapting new forms of religion from other religions, or well, they were not religions, but they were cosmovisions of other
Mm-hmm.
tribes.
Right.
So that means that wasn't like, oh, it's closed, you cannot. So how can something that is like form from a lot of practices that open became closed because somebody says so? It's just nonsense.
Exactly. You said something that you said in the book that I really want to address, because I know because we come from that kind of folk Catholic background, and I think we see a lot in the internet sphere of kind of these people who want to make folk Catholicism kind of Orthodox Catholicism, and just say, "Well, I don't understand why you do this, or this is against the church." And it's like, you speak about in the book that it's like, no, folk Catholicism is that cross between devotion and heresy. And we'll call on Saint Anne one day, but Lucifer is also very is he works, like, he'll get the job done. And so
Yeah, absolutely.
I want could you just speak to that kind of distinction of folk Catholic practice for our viewers, for us?
Well, I will say, like, if you wanna, like, in the Mexican point of view, you have to remember that we had a really important and sad like war in Mexico after the Mexican Revolution. That was
Hmm.
pretty much from 1920 to 1940. That was the Cristero War.
Hmm.
So in the Cristero War, we had a president who was agnostic.
Hmm.
He didn't want the Catholicism. And we had in that time period a lot of presidents that were agnostic, atheists, and we had a lot that they were, hi, what is that logia that has the band here? Hi, Michael, remind me how.
I'm trying to think.
Los masones, the
The Masons.
masonry. We
Masons.
had, so in that time period, we had like probably 5 or 6 presidents that they were totally against Catholicism.
Hmm.
So what they did, they passed a law of that anybody who was practicing Catholicism was going to be. There is actually a movie. I don't remember the name. So a lot of we have a lot of martyrs, just like martyrs, like
Mhm.
Santo Toribio de Romo was a priest who died executed in that war, um, because they couldn't practice Catholicism.
Right.
So what was start happening? People starting practicing Catholicism in their houses.
Mhm.
Women were doing the misa, were doing the la misa, because if they were caught, they were going to kill you. So I think a lot of folk Catholicism started like more strongly after that war,
Mhm.
especially in Mexico. So, but just like, they didn't have, this woman didn't have the preparation that the men of the clerical has. So they
Mhm.
kind of twisted a little bit these traditions with what they knew
Right.
already. So I think that's a lot of that. And I think too, at least in Mexico, people is very, very like mad and like frustrated on how like church there is so far away from social reality
Mhm.
that we just do what we have to do. But the funny part is something that I just remember. One day you posted something, and even Catholicism is not practiced in the same way everywhere in the world. I
Right.
remember like I said one time like, "Oh, I have to like steal the holy water." And Jan Michael said, "Why are you going to steal it if it's free?" And I'm like, "Not in Mexico."
Right.
But in Mexico, as an example, I try to baptize my younger kids here. And I'm going to tell you, like, it's pretty much impossible because you have to be a member of the
Mhm.
church. And they give you pretty much 52 envelopes. So
Mhm.
for you to, and after that, we can talk about, the little preparation and talks. And I was like, that's not how we do in Mexico. In
Right.
Mexico, you just like pay like $20 or $30, even though like you never go to the church, and you just choose the padrino and madrina. Oh, and here they were looking like the padrino and the madrina were married by the church. And I don't know how many requirements that over there in Mexico. This just like you just find a madrina and a padrino, they're not even married. Probably they don't even know each other.
Right.
And there is even churches that they don't even ask you for the $20, and you don't even take the talks. I was baptized in the most ghetto like church where like the people who has addictions and do sex work, they just take their kids, and the priest do what he has to do. But even Catholicism, just like folk Catholicism, is not practiced, or is not. I think it's since it's very institutionalized.
Mhm.
It's very institutionalized too in a different way in different countries.
Right.
So when I told them like, no, in Mexico you just can baptize your children if you want. It doesn't matter if you go to other church, or if your husband is pretty much like Lutheran and you're Catholic. But here is like, dang, con lupa, like pretty much like, let me see all the documents and let me see like. So I think has a lot of to do with that. Even when you talk about Catholicism, the actual right. I remember to Michael, that you said like one day when get married, I wanna use a lasso.
Mhm.
If you go to some countries, there what is a lasso?
Right.
Because it's not, even the ceremonies are not the same everywhere.
Right.
If you go to Filipinas, yes, because that's another thing that I have to tell. I was so mad because somebody told a girl that she couldn't practice Mexican sorcery because she was Philippine. I was like, dude, she's like our cousin. Like,
Yes.
I mean, seriously, they have Spanish heritage. The Spanish sent the Tlaxcaltecas to conquer Filipinas, just like they did in northern Mexico because they couldn't fight the Chichimecas because they were like professional warriors. So pretty much we're cousins. You're telling somebody who shares the same ancestors, pretty much
Mhm.
of the northeastern part of Mexico, to not practice like what it shares by ancestry and in at 75, 80%, probably more than you do
Right.
because it's the same area, that it's
Well,
just crazy.
I think that's a perfect segue into another big question I wanted to ask you about. Two things, kind of really. One is that um, so much of our practices in folk magic and in Catholic conjure, folk Catholicism, and so forth are based on the reality of social justice not being meted out, and that social justice struggle, like we said, may have started in the old country or the old countries that make up your culture. And you said something on, I think it was on Leilani's podcast, where you talked about adopting a culture, and then we were talking before the show about how I grew up in a Afro Sicilian neighborhood, and then it became Puertorriqueño, Americano, and now today it's actually Filipino. But some of those Puerto Rican and Mexican aunties became like my own family. Like they raised me too. So I was exposed to things like Santeria and brujeria. So and for the people who are watching, who might say, I read all about this and I read about how important the ancestors are, but my uncle or my grandfather or my father or whatever was an asshole. They I think a lot of people miss the fact that one, our ancestors aren't just limited to blood.
Mhm.
Two,
Absolutely.
if we create that space, that container for the veneration to take place, the rest of your ancestors are going to have your back, and you're not going to have to deal with the one who was an asshole. And three, they might come around, so
Yeah,
you don't want to
absolutely.
Yeah.
deprive yourself of those connections. Can you talk a little bit about that, because you do such a great job in the book with that?
Well, I'm this is a personal opinion and I think it's a cultural one too, but for me, gender and Mexicanicity or even nationality is a social construct.
Mhm.
It's something that it was, you know, made up in very recently, just like gender is a social constructor. So it is Mexicanicity. I even put the example of Chabela Vargas calling herself a Mexican.
Yes.
Like everybody was like, but why Chabela? I think Chabela was a woman who was very advanced a la época to you know, the historical context because she, above all things, she was Mexican, but she was very queer too. So everybody was like, but why Chabela? You keep calling yourself a Mexican because I'm Mexican. But why? You were born in Costa Rica. You have, yeah, but Mexicans are born whatever the fuck we want. And I think, that's how the promedio, like all of us in Mexico, think. I don't know you, Michael, Michael, that I don't know if you are aware of how much we love Juan Pablo II, the Pope that was,
Mhm.
how do you
Yeah.
say it in English?
John Paul II.
John Paul II.
Yes.
Yes.
And he loved us.
Mhm.
Every time he used to go a place and people used to ask him, your nationality. Well, I'm a Mexican from Poland because every time he went twice, he actually went to Monterrey one time. Mexicans used to sing, Juan Pablo, hermano, tú eres mexicano. Like, Juan Pablo, my brother, you are Mexican. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So he understood how Mexicans, think, just like Chavela. So for me, I don't have any problem with somebody and any Mexican that like Mexican over there, but here everybody have their own way of thinking. But over there, like if you want to call yourself Mexican with pride, even though like you didn't wasn't you were not born there, or you have your Spanish with accent, or you don't even speak Spanish, it's not something that it gets us mad. It gives us pride because it gives us like a sense of brotherhood, like a fraternal you know connection.
Until
But
you hear
that's
my
how.
accent.
No, no, even though, like, but people over there is so different from people over here.
Hmm.
People over here sometimes even take it as, like, oh, you're crossing boundaries or you're appropriating something, which is not how we see it over there. Um, so that was, I think, and I talked this with Michael so many times. I'm nervous, Michael, because this book comes from the the thinking and the feeling of a Mexican woman who was born and raised there and who shares the same way of thinking of the people who lives there.
Right.
You know, so what do I do? And I remember Michael said, like, if you do it from a place of love and compassion and honesty, you're going to be fine. But this is how we feel. And I think not only us Puerto Ricans, just like you said, Cubans, we're very welcoming. We're very like las tías. You don't have tías, yo te adopto. I adopt you like as my nephew, as my niece. So I hope we don't lose that as new generations.
No, I think that it's very true. And I think what has happened, at least in the United States context, is we've become very divided, which is, of course, just the construct of this country. Or this country was one of constant division, which you don't see in Latin America. Like, the opposite was true. It's like, well, let's get everybody together and maybe we can just make it homogeneous, and even though it was rooted in kind of white supremacy and things like that, it created something very beautiful, kind of sprung up out of that.
I had a question in one podcast, and I think there is a lot of people, because that was another thing that I was very nervous about, that I used the word mestizo like 3 times. And I know a lot of people has a problem with the word mestizo because it's rooted on like the casta system. And I try to explain, yeah, but words develop and words evolve,
Hmm.
and this word has a totally different meaning from what it was 600 years ago. And at the end, I was so nervous that I told Yurika, you need to help me. We need to come up with a word. And she's like, Gabby, this is not a slur.
Right.
People may be uncomfortable with the word mestizo, but it's not an insult. It's not a slur. And you have to, say your truth, like how people think over there. And I had like a podcast who is more like anti-colonialism and very vocal and very like opposition. And I always say yes because I think everything should be talked, because if we don't talk we don't understand each other. And she's
Right.
like, but I think this was very bad because this was a way to erase like indigenous people. It was a way to erase African Mexican Afro Mexicans, And I said, like, yes, I understand where your comment come from. And but you have to understand, as a person who says to do magic, everything has two sides of the coin.
Hmm.
Everything that you do is going to have the pros and the cons. Yes, Mexico has a lot of colorism. I wouldn't call it racism, but has a lot of colorism like everywhere in the world, even in
Right.
Asia, you know yes, these erased a lot of Afro Mexicans, and these erased a lot of indigenous Mexicans, but I think we don't have as bad problem like we do have in the States. Oh no, it's the same, but you guys in Mexico doesn't admit that. I'm gonna tell you why. We already had two presidents in Mexico who had a African, they were African descendants. Two,
Right.
way before Obama.
Right.
In Mexico, was never illegal to marry somebody from a different casta.
Mm-hmm.
Here, there is a state still that you cannot have interracial marriage in the United States. Mexico abolished um, slavery many years before the United States. And I went on and on and on. Yes, it broke things, it broke a lot of erasure for certain groups. But at the same time, I think because of that, we don't have the same problems like people has in the United States.
Right.
And isn't it crazy that the same people that say they have a problem with mestizos so many times, they don't have any problem with bruja. They don't have any problem with a lot of other words that didn't come that aren't indigenous to Mexico.
Exactly.
They come from other
Exactly.
cultures too. Just like
Exactly.
strega and witch and stria, those words all, they weren't what our ancestors identified as. They're words that were
Exactly.
applied to us, and they evolved. And
Exactly.
we said on the last show, depending on what day of the week it is, I might identify as a witch or I might not. I might
Mm-hmm.
identify as a strega, I might not. It
Yeah,
just depends
absolutely.
on the context, the
Exactly.
people, and languages living, and our practices have to be living. So
Yeah.
we have about 5 minutes to go. I would love to ask one other question for you, and then I'll leave it the last question to Michael. In your experience now since coming to this country, um, do you see uh, um, sort of a revitalization taking place, or a transformation? I'm trying. There's a word I'm looking for. I can't think of what it is. Sort of an evolution of the practices from the old country that are now becoming sort of like an American brujeria. Um, is that something that you think is I already think I know what your answer is, but do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's not a good thing?
Yeah,
And what would you say
absolutely.
to practitioners?
Yeah. I think, well, taking into the context like the American brujeria that, even Jay Allen cross put in his writing, I think it's a good thing. Anything that get us closer to our ancestry is you know marvelous. I think just like there is a lot of like ramas or like of the same practice, this is going to happen wherever we go. I even put an example of pozole that I tell the Mexican brujeria is like the pozole. We have black, we have white, we have red, and we have green. It's like very like bad to just call like traditional or authentic to the red one,
Mm-hmm.
because the place where you go is how you're going to get served
Right.
you know so it happens the same thing with American brujeria. But the thing that I always make sure to tell them, you can make a white pozole, a red pozole, a green pozole, a black pozole, but all the pozoles have hominy. With the hominy is the folk Catholicism. If you
Mm-hmm.
take the hominy out of that pozole, it's not a pozole anymore, it's a caldo.
Mm-hmm.
So once I start hearing like, oh, this is my brujeria, but it has nothing. Oh, well, that's not brujeria. That's
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that I'm very clear, because that's not traditional. That's not. I understand like, the flora, the fauna, the plants, the environment, the weather changed from one place to another, and we had to adjust. But it's some things like we are not able to take out of the brujeria and still call it Mexican brujeria. And one of them is folk Catholicism.
Mhm. So Laura, I'm just gonna close us out for tonight. Is there any words of wisdom that you want to give those who are watching tonight as they may start to embark on this practice into Mexican sorcery? And what is it that you want to leave us with tonight?
Well, it's something that I'm trying to say in every podcast that I go, because just like I said, I'm not only going to bring chaos and harm and justice into the world. I think we need a lot of healing, all of us.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of people who's listening is Mexican American, or um, is the daughter or the son of immigrants, or the granddaughter, or something that immigrate all the clan many generations ago. And probably you guys, you, anyone that you know, feel uprooted, it feels like nostalgic, feel like they lose something. I just want to tell you that, something that I would like somebody maybe tell, or has the opportunity to tell my great grandchildren when I'm not here. Immigration is an act of love, and it's an act of bravery a lot. Somebody many generations ago was already giving you that love. Didn't even know you, but thought about you and give you a better future. And that's why you're here. That person probably left behind his family, his or her parents or her dead people, and never was not able to see them again, just for you to have a better chance. You're loved. You were a person who, were thought about many generations ago. Just embrace that gift, because somebody already paid the price. The same with your magic. Embrace it. There is nothing wrong with that.
I knew we weren't going to get through the entire show without you making us cry once. Thank you so very much. And I mean, this was an amazing interview. It's an incredible book. I'm going to put the graphic back up on the screen one more time, just because I so love the book. But I thank you even more for that powerful way of ending and reminding us of the not only the gift that immigration is to the descendants of those who came here, but the gift that it is to every single one of us in whatever country you're watching this from. Because without that, our cultures don't evolve. There wouldn't be brujeria de rancho, there wouldn't be stregoneria, there wouldn't be any of these other practices if somebody
Yeah.
didn't come in and bring their magic to our society as a whole. So thank you, Laura, so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Michael. And I apologize that we had to keep to the clock tonight because I have a class to do right after this. But I thank you, and we're going to end the show tonight with a message, a public service announcement from the Charter for Compassion. And I would normally jump into the green room afterwards and just thank you again, but I won't have the time to do that tonight. So I thank you. And now the word from a Charter for Compassion. Good night, everybody.
Right.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions,
calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
With absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life.
To refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain.
To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest.
To impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody.
And to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies.
Is a denial of our common humanity. We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately.
And that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women
to restore compassion
to the center of morality and religion,
to return to the ancient principle
that any interpretation of Scripture
that breeds violence,
hatred,
or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information
about other traditions, religions, and cultures.
To encourage a positive appreciation
of cultural and religious diversity.
To cultivate
an informed empathy
with the suffering of all human beings,
even those
regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world.
Rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness.
Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries.
Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential for human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity.
It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable in the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.